Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining this hot topic briefing today, where we're going to talk about the balance between cybersecurity, regulation, compliance, and innovation, and how we do that on a day-to-day, and what practical tips can do. I'm Camilla Bullock, one of the Director Generals in the Emerging Payments Association Asia. I also have my co-director, John Ryan, with me. He's in the audience, and you will meet him at the round tables in just a little bit. And I also have an amazing panel, which my moderator of today, Soren Thoma, will introduce to you in a second. What we do at the Emerging Payments Association, as many of you know, is we're creating this neutral arena where we can come together and talk about hurdles and opportunities to improve the industry that we are active in, but also for our clients downstream or our peers in the value chain. And the challenge of cybersecurity is something that is growing day by day and something we have to tackle together. And today we're happy to host this session together with PayPal. And we're drawing from a research paper that they did recently. I will share it in the chat later on for you who haven't seen it. But one point has really stayed with me in this white paper, and that is that if we look at coming out of the pandemic, what we've gone through, and how fintech has played such a big part of helping companies, both big and small, to go digital, is that in the research is pointing that those companies who've been in the middle of it and helping everybody else are not cyber resilient themselves. So our industry have so much to do to help both downstream, but also to help ourselves. So we're happy to collaborate and host this also together with AmCham in Australia, who is a good friend of us, and we've done events with them previously. And this is to actually get that good balance around the table when we're talking about it. So it's also the big corporates and the SMEs. And let us hear a little bit from April Parmelee, who is the CEO at AmCham, before we kick off. April, over to you. Oh, I could guess.
Camilla. Thanks so much, Camilla. And hello to everybody who's dialing in from around the world. Thanks very much for joining us on this roundtable discussion today. I want to thank the EPA and especially Camilla Bullock, my good friend, for suggesting this topic and inviting us to collaborate, because it is a very important topic for the Australian and American companies that are part of my chamber. And as she said, for the big MNCs down through to the startups and small and family-owned businesses. So I'm anticipating really good, robust discussion in our roundtables. AmCham Australia is one of many AmChams around the world, and we work to promote two-way trade and investment between Australia and the United States. And this topic is essential to all of our members. Really, the word cybersecurity really still strike fear in some people's hearts because they have this common misperception that cybersecurity is all about these intricate technologies and complex algorithms and highly mathematical experiences, and you need technical expertise. But the reality is really different. And most cybersecurity incidents, you guys would probably know this, more than 95% of them are the result of human error. You know, the phishing, the click here, mistakes that your team can make. So cybersecurity really entails governance and cultural and mindset change, training, risk management, course technology. So there are a lot of different ways that we as executives can work to build more resilience in our teams. The press is full of reports about successful cyber attacks, from ransomware to data breaches, payment fraud, phishing, unauthorized access. And despite all of our best efforts and billions of dollars that get spent on these cybersecurity defenses, the statistics are bad, and they continue to be quite bad. The harder we work to protect ourselves, the more the cyber criminals seem to find ways to circumvent and get around our strength and security. So it's a constant battle. They're now piggybacking on the boom in e-commerce and online shopping that's a result of the COVID lockdowns that have happened around the world. And research shows that a lot of small and medium-sized retailers who are selling goods from clothing to gardening equipment, medical supplies, have had their websites hacked. And the payment details have been stolen, and they don't even know it's happened. a friend of mine at the Pentagon said there are two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. It really is widespread. It's a global problem that's affecting any business that accepts payments from customers online, and that's almost anyone. The word payment is used in a third of all attack email subjects, and most of cybercrime is now mobile. 70% of online fraud is accomplished through mobile platforms, in fact. So today's interactive webinar, which AmCham Australia is really happy to support, is about how we solve this problem. And we've gathered some great experts together for you, but we just as much want to hear from you. We want this to be very much of a roundtable, a two-way discussion. Payment technologies are vital because they underpin all the electronic and online commerce that we all do. And we have to protect consumers and businesses that want to engage in online commerce, because that's how we're all going to grow and prosper in the future. So we have to continue to innovate. We have to continue to do things better. And the US and Australia are committed to working with all countries across Asia to achieve cybersecurity for our businesses. So working together, hopefully we can achieve some success. We'd love to hear you contribute your ideas, your experiences, your knowledge, and your feedback during today's event. And it's my pleasure now to turn it over to your excellent moderator, Soren Thoma.
Thank you so much, April. I'd also like to start by, first of all, a vote of thanks to all the sponsors, to PayPal and Akamai, and to AmCham for making this webinar possible, and to welcome you all. And I'd just like to make a few comments to set the scene. So following on from what April said, despite significant effort and spending, it seems that we're still at risk as business and as consumers. The threat landscape is evolving and changing, and bad actors seem to innovate faster than the rest of us, and we're all struggling to catch up and to keep up. But it's not all bad. So there are some key points perhaps that I'll be interested in your feedback. One is, good stories seem to be invisibles. They're not shared. They don't make the press because it's not as much fun as when one attack succeeds. They're not promoted, and we don't seem to, in the cybersecurity business, we don't seem to celebrate success. So for example, if you look at investment banks, when they complete a major acquisition, they have a huge party. When we succeed with defending against a major attack, nothing happens and there is no party. So how do we promote the positive side of cybersecurity and the successes that we have? Executives and boards are inundated and flooded with regulatory and compliance requirements, and they're overwhelmed sometimes by the noise that comes out of the industry, and sometimes the industry tries to use fear in order to trigger some action. So we need to find a balance where we can encourage people to innovate as well as comply, as well as deliver a great customer experience, because ultimately payments involves the customer. Sometimes I see great technology being very badly implemented. For example, multi-factor authentication. We all know that authentication is very valuable and is very important, but if it's not implemented correctly, it simply just doesn't work. So then you are exposed to more risks than you realized you were. So in this discussion today, we are basing it on the report from PayPal and the summary paper from the last webinar. We are looking from you to get your insights and your views, to get suggestions for what more can we do. And I love this last question that I always like to ask people to consider. If you had a magic wand, what would you do? How would you fix this problem? So before we break up, we should have a little bit of a panel discussion, and I'd like to introduce the panel, if I may. We have with us Seema Sangari. She is the Vice President of Program Management Security at Salesforce. Welcome, Seema. We also have with us Jeff Hu, who is the Head of Security Solutions at Akamai. Welcome, Jeff. And we also have Forum Mehta, who is the Senior Director, Asia Pacific. He's also the Chief Information Cybersecurity Officer. So at PayPal. Welcome, Forum. So Seema, if I could start with you, what's your view? How do you see what's happening in the industry at the moment, especially in relation to payments? And what are some insights from you?
Thanks, Soren. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be here. So I think April and you touched upon a very common theme, which is threat landscape, as we are hearing from, as we all know, is evolving. And on top of that, we have pandemic that's added a new layer of complexity to our and expanded our attack surface. So we definitely are very aware of rise in phishing attacks, ransomware attacks, and a lot of recent breaches that have come in light. So things at least on top of our mind are always. I think something that we talk about Salesforce quite a bit is how do we build and build with a secure code in mind first. How do we bring security to the left and instead of retrofitting it later on? So security trust is number one conversation that plays, at least in ours, and a lot of customer conversations that we have. And I would also say that the conversations from what it was like 5 years back to what we are having have become a lot more mature and sophisticated as far as security goes.
Thank you, Seema. If I could go to you, Foram, what are some of your insights?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, we've talked about the study a couple of times. So for those that haven't come across it, let me just kind of quickly recap why we wanted to do a study and what it kind of brings out. You know, in my role in APAC, as we continue to do a couple of things, right? Provide services for the first time for millions of people getting technology access for the first time, and COVID accelerated that. We wanted to make sure that just like governments and economies look at technology as a empowerment, as a economic growth tool, that they, on the other side, that they have the trust in these systems that they start using, whether they are mobile wallets, whether they are just online commerce type of things, again, whether by choice or because of the conditions. We were asking that with all the things that you mentioned, April mentioned, Camilla mentioned, over the last 12 to 18 months, the number of cybersecurity related regulations that have come out in this region across the board are just unprecedented. So, you know, just take a stop and ask whether they're having the desired impact. Harmonization has been talked about a lot of times. That's clearly an area where, whether it is UN-led Cyber Norms Initiative or others are coming, but beyond that, right, the divergence, does compliance stop innovation? If a company that starts in Australia and wants to expand into Singapore, or even within Southeast Asia, since the study is focused on ASEAN, how does compliance kind of drive business models and expansion plans purely based on the compliance requirements that come out, have come out in the recent time? There's clearly, you know, it was important to check whether compliance is equated with security, because there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding that once you comply and certify and get somebody to check and pen test, and then you are golden. And clearly all the breaches that have happened have shown that most of these companies, if not all, were all compliant and had all kinds of certifications. So it's not the same. And security, I think, you know, Seema touched upon it. How do you shift left, and how is it a process rather than a certification or a point in time type of a check that you do and then move on? And then last but not least, from a talent perspective, how is everything kind of coming together? Do we have the right skill sets? Do we have right access and right type of updating is happening in you know, right type of, whether it's at the curriculum level for universities, whether it is for mid-tier people, whether it is for folks who want to transfer into cybersecurity, because it's clearly an important role. So taking all of this, what we did in the study was to survey about fintech companies of various different sizes. And the survey shows a lot of different results, Soren, that you kind of highlighted already, that less than 30% companies have a dedicated cybersecurity staff. And this is more about fintech startups in ASEAN region. So they did not think that they needed a dedicated person. More than 80% thought that compliance kind of drives their investment budget on anything related to security. So it wasn't a forethought, it wasn't a proactive type of a discussion, thinking that if I'm going to offer a new way to do payments, if I'm going to offer a new way to manage your data, transact with your customers, that trust may be a value proposition that I should invest in actively. But they waited for compliance to kind of drive what is the minimum that is expected of them from regulators, from different types of industry associations like PCI and so forth. And, having said all of that, more than 40% admitted that they've had some sort of a cybersecurity incident in the last 12 months. Not necessarily reportable, but at least something that gives them, a pause for concern to say there's something going on. And we know that, right? There's these days, anything that is of value, people are going to come after. There is no discrimination in types of industries. While financial services leads the number of attacks, I think CrowdStrike's report says we have about what it experiences 300x more attempted attacks than any other industry. If you are online, if you have some data that is valuable, if you have access to financial instruments, if you have access to health records, and you are vulnerable, people are going to attack you. So having said all of that, and now it's we put together what we are calling as the PayPal cybersecurity fintech matrix that looks at 5 key pillars: the legal landscape, what type of policies, regulations have come out for each of the ASEAN 10 countries, what type of investments are happening, what type of collaborations are happening, what type of awareness, talent development campaigns are coming across, and then what type of research collaborations are happening. And these are not comparisons. The matrix is not a comparison to see whether Singapore is better than Malaysia or Thailand is better than Indonesia, but rather for each stakeholder, whether it is a business, whether it is a regulator, whether it is a consumer or anybody else, academia, think tanks, to think about, one, again, depending on who you are, to say whether the initiative that we are part of is having the desired impact, and 2, where should the investments, resources, and efforts kind of go. So I'll kind of stop there to bring back to your original question. Is what the report does is takes all of this and then offers certain recommendations based on our experience around the world, working with in 200 plus markets, complying, offering trust as a key value proposition to the products that we offer in a variety of different markets, and then engage in these type of discussions to say, what can we do? Where can SMBs, especially, but fintech specifically, come and start to think of trust and security as a value proposition and be a bit more proactive and implement, once again, some of the steps that Seema mentioned and we'll discuss to, I guess, not constantly be playing catch up. Thanks.
Thank you, Foram. I think you're absolutely right in terms of we need to consider security in line with what Seema said as well, right from the very beginning. So when it comes to fintech startups, it should be part of the funding and it should be part of the plan right up the beginning. So security is part of it from the very beginning. And it's really easy to forget. And perhaps that's where we can do some work with business angels and investors and venture capital firms to make them aware of that. So to make sure that security is included. I think the PayPal report is very extensive and very broad. And I think it has a very good set of recommendations. But then I think there's also things that we can do as individuals. So for example, the reason I started off by saying that we don't celebrate achievement, one of the best ways to attract talent into cybersecurity is to celebrate achievement, is to actually recognize people for their skills. And it's also, I think, we need to look at training and how we train people in order to give them skills, not just technical skills, but skills to engage the business, skills in the risk management area, skills around people and psychology and managing people. So especially in a small to medium business area where you have staff that have to be multi-skilled. So if I can come to you, Jeff, I know that you work with a lot of customers and you experience a lot of things at Akamai. What are some of your insights?
Thanks, Soren. First of all, glad to be back on this collab. Thank you for having me. I think the speakers have added a lot of insights to today's conversation. I suppose what I can bring to is the practical side of things. And as I think about those key points everyone's kind of mentioned, I just want to step back and reflect. What can you control? What can't you control? What is balance, right? I think the data, the report also mentioned, right? Cost is creating a boundary around innovation, security, and even meeting compliance, And as you said, Soren, despite significant effort from large organization, we still see weekly news on breaches and incidents. Makes me wonder, if it's happening to large organization, what will it take to help startups and SMEs to prosper? Now, just to underscore this point, some of you may know in the last couple of days, the website for the National Cyber and Crypto Agency in Indonesia was defaced. Now, it's unlikely that we know, like you say, Soren, they kind of talk about it, but they probably won't deep dive into how the attack was done. But putting benefit to the doubt, for a body that shapes cybersecurity standards and technical policies, in all the fields of Indonesia's cybersecurity incidents, right, whether it be detection, protection, prevention, recovery, whatever it is, I feel there's a lesson to be learned here, especially for our industry. Now, one other thing that I notice is that with this kind of constant change in regulation and compliance, right, organizations are put under a lot of pressure to just blindly implement controls from cybersecurity frameworks. Perhaps some of them to comply to regulations, some of them to help them prioritize cost, right? But is it sufficient? As Foran mentioned, we put a lot of effort to comply, but not a lot of focus on effectiveness of the implementation. And with effectiveness, I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about metrics and dashboard that give you visibility, because that's just output, right? I'm talking about business results, which is outcomes, right? Now, are customers' experience impacted by the added controls? How is the business growth impacted? Okay. What about the cost of business, like ops, impacted? I'll just give you a very simple example here. Every organization would have a backup strategy, right? I hope they do. But how many of them actually have a routine to do a restore of those backups? I've seen organizations get hit by ransom, go, we're not going to pay ransom. We've got backups, don't worry about it. They restore the backups and they don't have continuity because the backups don't work. They're bits of their application and infrastructure that have changed, making everything break, right? That's just an example of, yes, we tick the box, but are we effective at the strategy? Right? Now, the other thing is when you're targeted, there's no escaping fiscal loss, pre-incident or even post-incident. So to me, balancing also means understanding your business risks, right? Now, especially post-incident, understanding the cost of implication from whether it be regulation impact or litigation impact, and of course, ultimately your business impact, right? Being able to manage those risks and be prepared to survive is what I consider business resiliency. That's what we're talking about, balancing innovation, security, and compliance. I'm afraid I won't have time to cover about the people side of things. Soren, I love that topic, the culture, the celebration, but perhaps we can do that in the breakout.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
One topic that came up at the tables and that I talked a little bit to was how to catch the attention of the people that should actually be in the discussion. And that's something that resonates with me because when I do the reach out to sessions around cybersecurity and fraud, there are most clicked on articles after DLT and blockchain and crypto, but I mean that's the topic of the season. But when it comes to actually come and join the conversation and be the face for it, people get a little bit like, oh, I'm not sure, and they're pointing left, Sima. They're pointing to somebody else, like the CIO, the CTO. While it's so important for the whole company, especially the strategists and the product owners to come. But enough from me. Soren, I'm going to hand over to you to take this through and share a little bit of the findings. And April, I don't know if you have technical issues or not, but I know something is happening in your office. You're welcome to join in and share and apply it to what you see with your members. So Soren, over to you.
All right, thank you. Perhaps we go the other way around. Let's start with you, Jeff. What was your table like? What did you guys talk about?
Oh, we started talking about the disadvantage of startups, and I was talking about actually as an advantage, right? From that aspect, we moved over to people side of things. Carrying on what you were mentioning around celebration and people. And me moving to my story, talking about the 3 bricklayers. I don't know if you know that story, but building the cathedral. So point was building culture that aligns to the company's mission. You can still be lean and mean and achieve those things. And then the discussion kind of evolved towards yes, lean and mean, but from a startup perspective, investors aren't willing to put money in if you don't have results. So it's a kind of chicken and egg situation, where if you have a product that is not secure, you're not doing the right thing by your customers, right? And yet without those, the investors won't put money in, which is interesting, right? We talked about how some people see cybersecurity as an IT problem, and they're trying to deal with it tactically. They're not seeing it yet as part and parcel of the business, business needs. So, and the need to partner with investors that value you value you and your vision as much as you value them. And the same relationship goes between, startups with their vendor partners, right? If you're under pressure to meet all these requirements and you go for things that just tick the box, you're doing exactly the same as what the investors are doing. You're picking solutions that just tick the box, right? Not really doing the right thing by your customers. So we had those kind of back and forth around that. It was quite interesting. We went to several different things around regulation, the APA regulation in Australia. We talked about that. What else did we talk about? Celebration. Back to people and celebration. I think it was Linda shared a bit about, hey, in the past they used to get visibility of the people working, the employees, doing the right thing by reporting phishing and promoting kind of a culture around, hey, mindfulness around security, right? Phishing attacks. So that kind of promotes awareness, right? Kind of educate people at the same time. And we pivoted from that conversation into, but there's an avoidance of talking about the reality. When people get attacked, they don't want to openly talk about it, right? Which is it doing service to cybersecurity? I think it's not, right? It's hiding it's only showing the tip of the real iceberg here. And the reality is, your board members and whatnot will not kind of see the real impact if we don't talk about it, right? And the other aspect is that you don't talk about it. What they tend to do is they kept perpetuating the whole ransomware cycle. They rather pay ransom than actually, openly admit, hey, we did our best and we got, this happened. So a lot of topics. It was very interesting. I hope it was recorded so someone could benefit from it.
Yes, and we'll do a bit of a write-up afterwards as well. Thank you, Jeff. Seema, would you like to go next? How was your table? What did you talk about?
Sure. Yeah, it was pretty interesting, definitely. So I think we started off with discussion around trust, how trust is very difficult. Even so, at personal, not only at personal level, but also business. When we talk to the customers, I mean, it's really hard to have around the conversation around trust. It takes a lot of time and effort to build the trust. We talked about relating to this. Some of the things which is typical of a lot of companies is around governance, risk, and compliance, where there's a lot of effort done on ever-ending audits, certifications, and driving some of the NIST stuff, NIST cybersecurity as projects. I mean, a lot of these are like constant, ever-going projects, and there's a lot of funding and a lot of, I would say, one of the person was talking about how this is more of a constant churn in terms of implementing some of this compliance and the controls around it. The other interesting aspect that we talked about was one of the person brought it up was, though we have a lot of awareness training, cybersecurity awareness training, companies do send out a lot of phishing emails. When companies do get breached, there is lack of information about what exactly are they doing to prevent the attacks. So there's a lot of visibility and there's a lot of upfront about what we should be doing. But once things happen, what do companies do to get out of it? I think there's a lack of visibility about it. One of the persons shared an excellent idea. I think that's could go either ways, as creating a repository which some people have access to what happened, how did they go about it, what are the lessons learned, so that some of the cross-pollination of things can happen. So we did focus quite a bit on cybersecurity awareness and how detection and response can play a key role. But even so on those areas, so there's limited awareness and visibility into this. Some folks get exposed a lot more, and one person was talking about how one of their daughter was going through an onboarding program, but after a week of onboarding, there was no mention about cybersecurity awareness. So there are some companies, so there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of bringing cybersecurity to the front limelight and on top of mind of people. What else? I'm just looking at my notes. Other one was, I think, something that Jeff brought it up in terms of risk and assessment, not only within your internal company controls, but also with your third-party suppliers and vendors. Not sure how many people think about that, the risk and some of the vulnerabilities that happen around the third party and the suppliers profile that exists today. So there's a need of providing the visibility as we mature some of those processes. Those were some of the big topics. I'm just trying to see if I missed it. Yeah, those were the big highlights, I would say, that, that we touched upon.
That's fine. Thank you, Seema. And
thank you.
Back to you, Forum, and to talk about what happened on your table.
Sure. We had a pretty diverse table, actually. So Namrata and I were geographically based in Singapore, and you know, we had Ross, Alice, John, Roger out of Australia, New Zealand area. From an industry perspective as well, it was interesting to see that I and Ross were in payments. Ross more on the the newer generation with distributed ledger and cryptocurrencies, and then we had Namrata from a product solutions side, Alice from services side, helping companies. So we started discussing kind of this the topic that we spoke about initially around compliance versus security and the approaches, and it was interesting to hear how in different organizations, depending on the maturity or lack thereof, whose responsibility it is, who's bringing up the discussion from whether it is on the fraud side, on just pure security side, compliance side, and then what type of initiatives are undertaken depends a lot on that combination of the industry and the people that are driving it rather than what is needed. And there is still some, gaps, and a lot of companies are still struggling to decide where to start or should they, be how much to be proactive if they do want to be proactive or let compliance kind of drive what they should be doing and not. We went around thinking about, again, the advanced technologies like blockchain, trying to solve every single security problem there is, and how it was, obviously mentioned that in a lot of ways, the consolidation that is happening for different products that are available companies have to think about different aspects, again, whether that meets their business model, not necessarily how, I do one specific thing or the other. Again, Namrata shared about how regulations in different countries, whether it is India, Australia, Singapore, are changing for something as simple or as, open to interpretation as it was for a company like authentication. Right? What does strong authentication mean? Does it mean one-time password? If it does mean one-time password, then from an SMS perspective, which for 5 years now, NIST has already been talking about why SMS is no longer, the right way or good enough. And people should look at behavior and other mechanisms, and are regulators doing it? Are companies adopting those type of things? We talked a little more about, culture, and you brought in, I think, Soren, you did, the idea that as security becomes mainstream, we can't only be thinking about all the challenges we have, solving them with technology. We need to groom talent from different sides of different streams, whether it is from a development in just people side, communications, just understanding risk a little bit better, fraud and all of that. And as that convergence happens, the next generation of solutions and the future of what cybersecurity looks like will while very, very optimistic, will not be kind of purely driven out of technology. There were a few other discussions, but I felt we had really nice, again, diversity of thought and industry kind of represented on the table. Really nice. Thanks to all the participants.
Thank you, Foram, and thank you to everyone who participated. Look, I think we're kind of running almost close to overtime, so what I will do is I'll do my magic one question, because I think it's always a way of creating some interesting thoughts. So if I had a magic wand, I would actually get cybersecurity people from the Security Operating Center to work 1 week out of every 4 in the business with the business, to understand the people that they're serving and that they're working with, and then coming back into Security Operating Center. And that way the business and IT would get everyone, would know what security does and how it works, and they would have a better insight and better engagement model. A second thing that I would look at doing, and this one is a little bit more challenging, a little bit more difficult, because I recognize commercial reality. When it comes to financial payments or payment apps, I'd create a security rating scheme. Now, you have to be really careful, because when you mandate something like that, it creates a cost, and there's a cost of compliance and technology. As we know, the actual threat landscape evolves, but to do it in such a way that it's effective, so that everyone knows, every consumer knows, this is a 2-star, say, app, or a 5-star app, and I'm really secure. So the level of security, creating some sort of a rating. I know there's difficulties, and that's why I call it the magic wand. And the final sort of a thing that I would do is something that Jeff mentioned that kind of I get really irritated with. People do incident response plans, but they never test them. They never simulate them. They do backups, but they never test them. They never restore them. So I would say every control that is implemented must be tested at least once every 6 months or once every 3 months. That way we know that things are going to work. And that could be part of the rating mechanism, say, for a financial payment app. So those were just some of the things that's kind of what I like about the Magic Wand, is because it takes the constraints away and you try and think in a more generic area. I am thinking about another one, and that is how do we share information and lessons learned better. I know there are professional organizations in these various forums, and it's very useful, some of those, some, like SANS Group, who does a very technical forum. But how do we share information across everywhere so that we all know how to deal with certain problems? That's another Magic Wand kind of a question. So Camilla, I think we're back to you. I think we're running a little bit beyond time, but the discussion was very stimulating.
No, it was great. Thank you very much, Jeff, Seema, and Poram, and April for doing the introduction, and for everybody who participated. And Soren, I'm so happy to have you on my team with this magic wand and go out and make it all happen. Because that's what we're here for, to really, not the magic wand people, but to really share the use cases and best practice and to come up to what is that together. We are for members by members. We also have done some really interesting project over the last, 12 weeks with the master students at the university. So we'll share that coming. It's a little bit out there, but it's quite thought-provoking and interesting. So we'll share that with all you guys here today. We have lots of interesting things coming up that's not on the topic of cyber and security, but it's always on compliance and regulation. And we're talking a lot about how can we actually incorporate the cyber factor into everything we do. So we're having another event actually later today talking about interoperability of digital identity and what that means for cross-border payments. So again, very aligned topic. And we're having topics around digital payments coming up. So please follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter. Stay tuned, and members, you constantly hear from us because we want to have you involved. And we're always happy when you show up and sharing, because that's how we make and pave the way for a better industry. So Soren, thank you for hosting and moderating. You're always a rock star on that. Yeah. And I hope to see you all soon again. Thank you. And thank you, PayPal and Akamai, for supporting that, and for Salesforce for joining.